Martinsburg Evening Journal, November 11th, 1918. Peace. Armistice signed at 2:45. Fighting stopped at 11 today. By International News Service, Washington, November 11th. The fighting has ended. Peace has succeeded war. A victorious nation today is celebrating peace. The end came suddenly. It took the form of a very brief dispatch from Colonel E.M. House to the State Department. The armistice has been signed, he reported. This word reached the State War and Navy building at 2:45 this morning, when Philip T. Patchen, chief of the Foreign Intelligence Division, walked into the room and announced, "Gentlemen, the armistice has been signed." It was 5 minutes later before any additional facts had arrived. They simply contained the following. The armistice was signed at 5 o'clock this morning, French time. Hostilities will cease at 11. The message already had been telephoned to the White House, but no one there would say whether it had actually been sent to the President's bedside. All members of the cabinet were at once notified, as were members of the diplomatic corps. The State Department announced that it would make no statement regarding the actual terms of the armistice until later in the day. It was understood that a cable message had been sent to Colonel House asking him whether the terms, as signed, were exactly in the form which had been forwarded to the President by Colonel House. Until this could be ascertained, the terms were withheld from publication. It was admitted that the terms were more harsh than those which Austria was forced to accept. They called on the demobilization of the armies and surrender of arms and munitions, surrender of sections of the fleet, evacuation of all occupied territory, and other guarantees which would make impossible any resumption of hostilities. But it was conceded that the terms really meant nothing to the German people. The old orders passed away as far as they were concerned, and the new German Republic in process of formation was certain to be made materially better through the changed conditions which peace would bring. Until complete official details are forthcoming regarding the armistice terms and the methods that are to be followed in enforcing them, the war machinery of the country is marking time. Secretary of War Baker has on his desk the recommendation of the General Staff dealing with the demobilization of the Army of the United States. These recommendations took the form of needed legislation and orders designed to check the flow of men into the Army. They were to be made public as soon as possible, probably in the course of today. Meanwhile, the Army and Navy program is to continue unchanged. Officials said that there would be no delay in the calling of the peace conference. It is expected that announcement of the Americans who will represent the interests of the United States will be forthcoming as soon as the Versailles Conference can reach an agreement as to the time and place and basis of representation. It is likely that now, as the armistice terms have been signed, there will be a speedy restoration of order within Germany. Apparently, the reins of government there are now firmly grasped by the socialists. They have announced a common-sense program which will provide for the maintenance of order everywhere. Meanwhile, it is expected that the Allies will take steps to send foodstuffs so badly needed into the troubled country. Frederick Ebert, Vice President of the Socialist Party and President of the Main Committee of the Reichstag, has been firmly established as temporary regent. The next step, there will be the creation of the new republic, and peace will follow in natural succession. It is pointed out here today that while it is true that Germany is apparently bankrupt, yet the new Germany will find a world, and especially the United States, disposed to give her the necessary assistance to rehabilitate herself. There will be foodstuff set aside for the rationing of not only Germany, but also the peoples of her prostrate allies. Therefore, if the socialist government that is now being formed is strong enough to assist it, the nations of the world are not anxious for another Russia to be thrown on their hands. Announcement of the signing of the armistice was sent broadcast by wireless. An official message to the fleet prepared by Secretary Daniels was, however, held up for a while. Secretary to the President Tumulty said that one statement of President Wilson will be prepared by the President as soon as he received details of the armistice signing from Colonel House. Anticipating a possible celebration of the ending of the war, the White House ordered all the gates about the structure locked and guarded at 8:30 this morning. Only persons with credentials were allowed to enter executive offices. Town goes wild over victory and will celebrate joyous celebration. Martinsburg is today widely celebrating the victory of right over might and the triumph of Christianity and civilization. The news of the armistice signing was first proclaimed here by the sounding of the big siren at the City Hall at 4 o'clock. Soon all other whistles and bells joined in the noisy but glad paean of praise. Within a short space of time, hundreds of citizens were parading the street, and their numbers increased to thousands as the day began to dawn. Bonfires were lighted in numerous portions of the town, and red fires galore were burned. The mills shut down and employees paraded the streets carrying banners and flags. The jollification was at its height when the early edition of the Journal went to press. Bill flees away. William Hohenzollern, former King of Prussia and Emperor of Germany, the man who started the World Wars, reported to have fled to Holland, but this shouldn't prevent the Allies from getting the miscreant. Earlier today, the Journal is being issued earlier today, in order to confirm the signing of the armistice. Consequently, there will be no paper issued this evening, and the force will join in with the celebration, gave News First. The Martinsburg Journal was one of the very few newspapers in this section of the country to announce the abdication of the Kaiser Saturday evening. We gave the people the news before the Washington, Baltimore, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and other papers in this section. The Extra was in the streets at 5:30 o'clock.
Brownsville Herald, November 11th, 1918. Peace Extra. Autocracy has capitulated. German plenipotentiaries sign armistice 5 o'clock this morning. The nightmare of war paces from the earth. All hope never to return. The arrogant despot at last makes overtures to the real sovereign, the people. By Associated Press. At 5 o'clock this morning Paris time, the armistice was signed by the German plenipotentiaries. After 4 years and 3 months of fighting, the dream of William II is shattered by the downfall of the Hohenzollern dynasty. In God's own way, democracy reigns throughout the world. Encompassed from without by the crusaders of the world and besieged by revolution from within, the last absolute monarchy crumbles, and the people will rule the proud German Empire. The terms of the armistice will be made public later. It is announced from the State Department, but will include the immediate with arch crumbles, and the people will forces from France, Belgium, and Alsace-Lorraine. With the news of the signing of the armistice, there came no announcement whether hostilities had ceased. The first news of the signing of the armistice reached Brownsville this morning at 8 o'clock, and the feat was immediately bulletined at the Herald. Owing to the early hour of its arrival, many had not reached their places of business, and the news was not generally known, and only a small demonstration was made. The tidings was celebrated by the ringing of bells and the blowing of whistles, but the demonstration only lasted a short while. The first news of the signing was contained in the following telegram to the Herald, simply saying the armistice signed.
Imperial Valley Press, November 12, 1918. Huns quit. World conflict comes to an end as Germans accept Allied peace terms this morning. With the signing of a 30-day armistice, President Wilson speaks of the war as ended. Huns agree in every particular to the Allied demands. Great rejoicing over termination of conflict. By the Associated Press, Washington, November 11th. The World War ended this morning at 6 o'clock Washington time. The armistice was signed by the German representatives at midnight, according to announcement by State Department officials at 2:50 o'clock this morning. The terms are to be made public at 8 o'clock Washington time. By the Associated Press, Washington, November 11th. The President has issued a proclamation announcing that the Germans had signed the armistice as follows. My fellow citizens, the armistice was signed this morning. Everything for which America fought has been accomplished. It now will be our fortunate duty to assist by example, by sober friendly conduct, and by material aid, in the establishment of just democracy throughout the world. The President will read the terms of the armistice before a joint session of Congress today. The President read his address of more than 4,000 words in a little more than an hour. He said, "It is not now possible to assess the consequences of this great conflict. We know that the object has been attained, that armed imperialism is at an end, and that the arbitrary power of the military caste in Germany has been discredited and destroyed. The nations which associated themselves to destroy it have now definitely united to set up a peace which will satisfy the longings of the whole world for disinterested justice." By Associated Press, Washington, November 11th. The President today announced the armistice terms in the hall of the House of Representatives, where 19 months ago he asked Congress to declare war. The term follow, Military operations to cease on the Western Front on land and in the air 6 hours after the armistice is signed. Immediate evacuation of Belgium, France, Alsace-Lorraine, and Luxembourg to be completed within 14 days. German troops left in that territory after that period to become prisoners. Allied and American occupation to keep pace with the evacuation. Repatriation immediately of all inhabitants of the countries mentioned, including hostages and persons under trial or convicted. Surrender in good condition of the following equipment: 5,000 heavy and field guns, 30,000 machine guns, 3,000 mine throwers, 2,000 aeroplanes. Evacuation by the German armies of the countries on the left bank of the Rhine, these countries to be administered by the local authorities under control of the Allied and American armies of occupation. In the territory evacuated there shall be no evacuation of the inhabitants and no destruction of any kind shall be committed. Military establishments of all kinds shall be delivered intact. The German command shall reveal all destructive measures taken, such as the polluting of springs and wells, under penalty of reprisals. The upkeep of the troops of occupation in Rhineland to be charged to the German government. By Associated Press, Washington, November 11th. Strictly military terms of the armistice are embraced in 11 specifications, which include an evacuation of all invaded territory, a withdrawal of all German troops from the left bank of the Rhine, and the surrender of all supplies of war. All Allied vessels in German hands are to be surrendered, and Germany is to notify neutrals that they are free to trade at once on the sea with Allied countries. Among the financial terms included are restitution for damage done by the German armies, restitution of the cash taken from the National Bank of Belgium and the return of gold taken from Russia and Romania, the surrender of 5,000 locomotives, 50,000 wagons, 10,000 motor lorries, the railways of Alsace-Lorraine for use by the Allies, and stores of coal and iron are also included. The naval terms include the surrender of 160 submarines, 50 destroyers, 10 battleships, 8 light cruisers, and other miscellaneous vessels. Military terms include the surrender of 5,000 guns, field and light artillery, 30,000 machine guns, 2,000 airplanes, and immediate repatriation of all American and Allied prisoners without reciprocal action. The Allies are to hold the crossings of the River Rhine, Koblenz, Cologne, Mayence, and all bridgeheads within 30 kilometers of these cities. The German troops are to retire once from any territories that were held by Russia, Romania, and Turkey before the war. The right bank of the River Rhine is to become a neutral zone, and the left bank, now held by the Germans, is to be evacuated within 19 days. The armistice is for 30 days, but the president spoke of the war as coming to an end. Unconditional capitulation of all German forces in East Africa within 30 days is provided. By Associated Press, London, November 11th, Field Marshal von Hindenburg has placed himself and the army at the disposition of the People's Government at Berlin, according to a Copenhagen dispatch. Continued on page 6. Americans at conference to fix armistice terms. General T. H. Bliss, General J. J. Pershing, Colonel E. M. House, Admiral W. S. Benson, Admiral Henry T. Mayo. Here are the men who made the terms of the armistice to which the conquered Huns have surrendered. Colonel House is the personal representative of President Wilson. General Bliss represents the Army and Admiral Benson the Navy. General Pershing, commander of the Expeditionary Forces, and Admiral Mayo of the Naval Forces, were important advisors of the Allied Armistice Committee by reason of their direct contact with the German fighting forces. El Centro celebrates final Allied victory here. News received at 1:13 this morning is the signal for a spontaneous victory celebration. Simultaneously with the coming of the glad news telling of the end of the World War, El Centro sprang to life. Sirens blew. Bells rang, and hundreds of excited citizens rushed into the streets to participate in the victory celebration. Hundreds of automobiles, filled with happy people, tooting klaxons and blowing horns, headed by the El Centro Municipal Band, paraded the streets for hours. Business houses closed and were not open until 10:30 a.m. The Kaiser, in effigy, was dragged through the streets with a rope around his neck and consigned to an ignominious death. A long black coffin prepared especially for the ex-monarch was also a notable feature of the victory parade. At 2 o'clock, but one overzealous victory fan had been reported for disorderly conduct. He was accused of administering a too enthusiastic slap on his wife's back. A continuation of the celebration is planned for this evening. The municipal band will meet at 5:14 at band headquarters prepared for any program arranged for that time. Notice to band members. All members of the band are requested to be at band headquarters promptly at 5:15 p.m., ready to play. We are planning on participating in the celebration this evening, and it is extremely important that every member be on hand promptly. B. H. Sisson, President.
The World, November 12, 1918. President Wilson reads Allies' terms of Germany before both houses of Congress. Reading indicates that military council at Versailles helped compose them. Washington, D.C., November 12. Within a few hours after hostilities had ceased, President Wilson read to Congress the victory terms upon which the armistice had been concluded. Tells of war's end. Standing where he stood 19 months ago and asked the nation to accept Germany's challenge and become a belligerent, the president yesterday told the country upon what conditions the Allied governments and the government of the United States had agreed to suspend further military operations. He spoke as follows: Gentlemen of the Congress, in these anxious times of rapid and stupendous change, it will in some degree lighten my sense of responsibility to perform in person the duty of communicating to you some of the larger circumstances of a situation with which it is necessary to deal. The German authorities who have, at the invitation of the Supreme War Council, been in communication with Marshal Foch have accepted and signed the terms of armistice, which he was authorized and instructed to communicate to them. Those terms are as follows. Military clauses on Western Front. 1. Cessation of operations by land and in the air 6 hours after the signature of the armistice. 2. Immediate evacuation of invaded countries. Belgium, France, Alsace-Lorraine, Luxembourg, so ordered as to be completed within 14 days from the signature of the armistice. German troops which have not left the above-mentioned territories within the period fixed will become prisoners of war. Occupation by the Allied and United States forces jointly will keep pace with evacuation in these areas. All movements of evacuation and occupation will be regulated in accordance with a note annexed to the stated terms. 3. Repatriation, beginning at once and to be completed within 14 days of all inhabitants of the countries above mentioned, including hostages and persons under trial or convicted. 4. Surrender in good condition by the German armies of the following equipment: 5,000 guns, 2,500 heavy, 2,500 field, 30,000 machine guns, 3,000 Minenwerfer, 2,000 airplanes, fighters, bombers Firstly D, 73s, and night bomber machines. All the above to be delivered in situ to the Allies and United States troops in accordance with the detailed conditions laid down in the Annex Note. 5. Evacuation by the German armies of the countries on the left bank of the Rhine. These countries on the left bank of the Rhine shall be administered by the local authorities under control of the Allied and United States armies of occupation. The occupation of these territories will be determined by Allied and United States garrisons holding the principal crossings of the Rhine, Mainz, Koblenz, Cologne, together with bridgeheads at these points in 30-kilometer radius on the right bank, and by garrisons similarly holding the strategic points of the region. A neutral zone shall be reserved on the right of the Rhine between the stream and a line drawn parallel to it 40 kilometers to the east from the frontier of Holland to the parallel of Jernschim, and as far as practicable a distance of 30 kilometers from the east of stream from this parallel upon Swiss frontier. Evacuation by the enemy of the Rhineland shall be so ordered as to be completed within a further period of 11 days, in all 19 days after the signature of the armistice. All movements of evacuation and occupation will be regulated according to the note annexed. Continued on page 4. Throng of 10,000 helped celebrate Allied victory. Martinsburg people turn out in large numbers for a parade. Thousands line streets and shout because of the glad news. Guns and pistols fired. Images of the Kaiser burned to crisp. Martinsburg celebration last night was unprecedented in the history of the city. For size as well as spirit, it cannot be compared with any similar affair held at a prior date. It is estimated that at least 10,000 people helped make the thing a success by participating in the parade, witnessing it, or at least shouting the joyous news the day had brought. Celebrate all day. While last night the big celebration was held, there was something doing practically all of yesterday. The parade, which began shortly after 4 o'clock in the morning, continued until near the noon hour, increasing in size every few minutes. When it subsided, the streets in the downtown section presented the appearance of a busy city. Automobiles and other vehicles by the hundreds, draped in American flags and other patriotic trimmings, paraded before the crowd, blowing their horns to the shouts of the thousands. Continued on page 8. Peace terms are the big problem. Diplomatic Washington thinks the victors will meet separately and submit their terms. By the Associated Press, Washington, November 12. America today turned toward ways of peace, with hostilities ceased under terms which include a renewal of the struggle. The United States, with associated governments, today took up reconstruction problems. Immediately ahead, however, diplomatic Washington sees the peace conference. When or where final peace negotiations will be held, the different officials would not conjecture. 30 days is a time allowed under the Armistice terms for assembling the Peace Congress. The Armistice, however, included a provision for its extension. Great interests are involved, many governments and nationalities are concerned, and the difficulties to be met with in convening such a conference in a short time may cause extension of the 30-day limit. It is regarded as likely that the peace conference will be similar to the meeting at Versailles, where the armistice terms were formulated. The victors meeting separately probably will decide upon terms, and then the defeated will be permitted to enter pleas for modification of the terms laid down by the winners.
The Daily Capital Journal, November 12, 1918. President Wilson reads Armistice. Washington, November 12. The 1,000 or more persons who were fortunate enough to crowd into the House of Representatives gallery to hear President Wilson unfold the armistice terms will have something to tell their grandchildren. It was probably the most impressive moment Congress has known, when the president, after a long outburst of clapping and cheering, started his recital of the terms to which Germany had agreed. Practically every high official of this government, including 2 cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, and foreign diplomats and their staffs, were either on the floor or in the galleries. When the president said, "Thus the war comes to an end," every person rose as though they had been drilled to do it at that precise moment. When the president read the clause providing for the evacuation of Alsace-Lorraine, every eye in the chamber seemed to turn to French Ambassador Jusserand. The ambassador turned to every corner of the house, wearing the smile that won't come off. Still smiling, he wiped his eyes and sat down. Charles Evans Hughes, former Supreme Court Justice and once candidate for president, was also on the floor and applauded frequently. Chief Justice White usually was the first to applaud when applause came. He had his hands a few inches from each other in constant readiness to clap them. Those who expected the president to indulge in any flights of oratory were disappointed, but he showed the emotional stress he was under several times when his voice broke and he had to repeat parts of sentences. Germany starts peace treaty offensive number 1. Remaining hope of evading justice is to split allies at peace table. Designed to arouse pity among Americans. Democratic movement must show evidence that it comes from spirit. By J.W.T. Mason, United Press war expert, New York, November 12. Germany's appeal to America for a modification of the armistice terms as a charitable act to save the German people from destruction is part of the new peace treaty offensive by which Germany hopes to create discord between America and the European democracies. Germany's sole remaining hope of evading justice is to split the Allies at the peace table. Every trick to this end known to the subtle diplomats of Berlin will be tried until the parchment is finally signed. Believing Americans to be new to the pitfalls of a coalition peace, the Germans are certain to continue to direct their disintegrating efforts, chiefly at Washington. Their present design is to arouse pity among Americans for Germany's sad plight. They hope to cajole the United States into forgetfulness of the 4 years of pitiless deeds by which the Germans tried to conquer the world. The German government is not the act of German people. It is the act of invincible prowess of the American and Allied armies. If Hohenzollern had not been beaten on the battlefield, the Germans today would be arrogantly flaunting democracy and boasting of Hohenzollern's kinship with Gott. The democratic movement in Germany has yet to prove it comes from the spirit. Continued on page 2. Note of sadness in celebration. Crowds shout Viva Clemenceau and Viva France. By William Philip Sims, United Press staff correspondent, Paris, November 12th. When the victory news arrived, the celebrating quarter of Paris came to life with a bang after 4 years of churchyard quiet. Students paraded, shouting, singing, harder than it hit any other section, waving flags. The war hit the quarter of Paris, rendering it silent and empty. Today it is as gay as ever, blossoming into new merriment, gaily bedecked in bunting. The roof of the Bourse almost lifted when the brokers boomed the Marseillaise. The streets were packed with merrymakers. The youths of Paris paraded in groups, carrying banners and shouting songs of victory. The only note was inside the homes where women folk were weeping when told the war was over, because all have at least one whom peace will not fetch home. A crowd of students went to the War Office and stood outside shouting, Viva Clemenceau. The premier appeared at the window of the first floor and later descended to the street accompanied by his daughter and several officers. Everybody was deeply moved by the demonstration that followed, while Clemenceau openly weeping. The premier suddenly imposed silence, then led the cheer, Viva France. Boys in trenches cheer as good news is passed along. Allied blockade still in effect, sees enemy vessels at sea. By Webb Miller, United Press staff correspondent. With the American armies in France, November 11th night. The noon communiqué merely said, hostilities ceased in accord with the armistice. Cheering doughboys passing along groups of prisoners at work on the roads invariably asked, well, what do you think of it now? The prisoners with never a comeback, only worked sullenly on. Truck drivers unearthed flags and decorated their vehicles. The troops yelled boyishly at passing staff cars full of laughing officers. Salutes were forgotten. How first news came. The first unofficial announcement of the armistice was picked up from the Eiffel Tower wireless about 5 o'clock, continued on page 3. New York went wild when it heard that armistice was signed. Elephants that were to have been in war work campaign not noticed. By Charles B. Driscoll, United Press staff correspondent, New York, November 11th. A herd of elephants elbowed its way solemnly up Fifth Avenue this morning, but nobody noticed it. A herd of green pythons talking French wouldn't have been noticed. For isn't the war over? As an overzealous sailor explained when he kissed a Brooklyn Bridge policeman. The elephants had intended to take part in a United War Work Campaign parade, but at 8 a.m. all New York was on parade, and there wasn't room for any formal processions. The delirium of last Thursday was rank routine compared with the super bedlam that reigns in New York today. It began with whistle blowing and siren screaming as soon as the official news of the armistice signing was received. By daylight, the celebration had assumed such proportions that late risers gave over all efforts to tie their neckties. Those who have motor cars continued on page 3. American Army Strength. Washington, November 12th. America's Victory Army totaled 3,600,000 men when the armistice was signed. It was learned here today. Of these, 2,100,000 were overseas and 1,500,000 in home camps.